Okay, so we have the Constitution, but we also have the Bill of Rights. This was adopted in 1791 to embody a series of protections for the individual against various types of interference by the federal government. It's also the first 10 amendments. Now, certainly the Constitution sets up our government, but the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, gives us our individual freedoms. Okay? Puts limits on both federal and state government actions. Originally, the Bill of Rights was limited only to the power of the federal government, but the 14th Amendment has been incorporated to most of these rights, and so that it applies to the states. So prior to the 14th Amendment, was the federal government was the only thing that could was not able to do certain things based on the Bill of Rights. But when the 14th Amendment came on, those individual rights were applied to the states, at least most of them were. Freedom of speech. In a democratic form of government, it cannot survive unless people can freely voice their political opinions and criticize government actions or policies. Okay? Well, certainly. I mean, that's what's so great about America. We can say how we feel about the government and what they're doing, because they're a free country and we have that freedom of speech. There's also, symbolic speech, gestures, movements, articles of clothing, and other forms of expressive conduct. We have a right to wear clothes that we want to wear. We have a right to say things we want to say. Okay, but there are reasonable restrictions. A balance must be struck between a government's obligation to protect its citizens and those citizens exercising their rights. There has to be a balance. Certainly you cannot run into a crowded movie theater and yell fire. Well, if there is a fire, you can. But one case of the book brought up is schools may restrict students' free speech rights at school-sponsored events. Okay, that can be done. What about corporate political speech? The court has held that a law forbidding a corporation from placing inserts in its billing to express its views on controversial issues violates the First Amendment. Okay? So yeah, corporations shouldn't be allowed to say how they feel about certain issues, along with their billings. Okay? Commercial speech. Restrictions on commercial speech will be considered valid as long as it meets three criteria. Must seek to implement a substantial government interest. It must directly advance that interest and must go no further than necessary to accomplish its objectives. Okay? So certainly in commercial speech you can't lie. Okay? What about unprotected speech? Obscene speech. I think it's great. I don't know what obscenity is, but I'll know it when I see it. That's funny. Anyway, test. Here's the test to see whether or not something's obscene. 1. The average person finds that it violates contemporary community standards. Remember that. It's community standards. Certainly I would think that the community here in Athens is substantially different than the community in, Los Angeles. Number 2. Work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interests of sex. Alright? So, is this a thing that's arousing or obsessive? If so, it's probably obscene. The work shows patently offensive sexual conduct. The work lacks serious, redeeming literary, artistic, or political or scientific merit. Okay? So all these things together, that's obscene. What about online obscenity? It's everywhere. Here's the question. How can we control the dissemination of obscenity and child pornography via the internet? Well, basically it's very difficult to do. Alright? Anytime the federal government has tried to regulate this, they've been knocked down because of freedom of speech. Alright? We have filtering software out there that will filter, what kids can and can't see. Meta tags, they're out there again to prevent kids from getting on these adult websites. Alright? But it just begs the question, what is obscene? I'll know it when I see it. Interesting. What about religion? Right? We have the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. The Establishment Clause has to do with separation of church and state. We've all heard that before. Now we have a separation of church and state. That's a result of what was going on in England. Okay? Prohibits the government from establishing a state-sponsored religion, as well as passing laws that show a preference for one religion over another. All right? So regardless of how you worship, whether or not you worship God or you worship the Greek gods or whoever, you're allowed to do that in this country. And this country is not going to tell you what religion to have. We also have the Free Exercise Clause. This means that you can go work out anytime you want. No, I'm kidding. No person can be compelled to do something that is contrary to his or her religious beliefs. Okay? When religious practices work against public policy, though, and the public welfare through the government, though the government can act. So if you have, I don't know, a religious belief that you are going to cut the heads off chickens, well, certainly, it's not good to do that in public because, it could get dirty and nasty. So the government has an interest in preventing you from doing that. Okay? But it's still protected. You can do it, but you need to do it at your own home. What about searches and seizures? Lots of good stuff here. It's the Fourth Amendment. Search warrants. Now, you got to have probable cause to get a search warrant. And probable cause is the officers must have trustworthy evidence that would convince a reasonable person that the proposed search and seizure is more likely justified than not. Okay, basically that means you got to have evidence that what you're searching for is actually there. Okay, it's more than reasonable suspicion, right? What about searches and seizures in a business context? Remember, the Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, sometimes there are searches that are reasonable, especially when it comes to business. All right. Now, the Constitution does protect businesses and professionals, but the government also has an interest to ensure compliance with federal and state regulations, i.e., the fire marshal coming in your building to make sure it's not going to burn to the ground. All right. That's a reasonable search. Now, there is a standard of probable cause, but it's not the same as it is for an individual. And then obviously the Fifth Amendment, self-incrimination. We've all heard this, I plead the Fifth. What this basically says is that the government cannot compel you to be a witness against yourself. Okay?